Basic Biology 1, we looked at the structure of a generalised animal, plant, fungal and bacterial cell. Now, the thing is, not all cells are like that. If they did, there's no way they could do their jobs properly. That's why we need... Now, there's a whole host of different types of cells in your body. And, well, in a plant's body. Actually, any multicellular organism has cells that have evolved specifically for a particular purpose. If we didn't, we'd look something like this. But we don't. And this is why. The cells of all multicellular organisms are specialised in one way or another. That way, they can work together. Now, if you have a set of the same type of cell working together to carry out one particular job, what you've got is a tissue, right? So, collection of cells, all of the same type, working together is a tissue. Now, if you gather a set of tissues together, and they don't even need to be the same type, and in fact, in a lot of cases, they aren't, in order to carry out a defined set of functions, what you've got there is an organ. Examples. Human heart is made of muscle cells, cardiac muscle, the thing that does the pumping, nerve cells, so you've got the things that control it and do all the sensing to make sure the pressure don't get too high or too low or whatever, speeds it up, slows it down, that sort of thing. Cartilage and ligaments, so that allows the valves to move. In fact, it makes up the valves and the tendons and stuff that holds it steady. Function, move blood around the body. Now, if you get a few of these organs together to do something, like for example move blood around your body and get dissolved oxygen and food substances to your other cells, you've got a system. In that case, cardiovascular, which is made up of your heart, arteries, veins, capillaries, and, well, red blood cells, white blood cells, plasma, loads of stuff. Get the right sort of systems together and you've got a full organism. That's you, by the way. We will go over that again in a bit more detail in a future video. But what we're going to do for the rest of this video is have a look at some specialised animal cells. Right? We'll start with this one. Now this is a nerve cell, also known as a neuron. These run from the spinal cord, or the brain, sort of around there, carrying electrical impulses to the central nervous system, which is that, to any part of your body. You've got sensory receptors in, for example, these things, and these. Oh, there's a lot of sensory receptors in there, and your skin's got quite a few different ones. And they also carry impulses from your central nervous system, which is your brain and spinal cord, to effector organs such as muscles or glands, or all that sort of stuff. The ones that run from the sensory organs to the central nervous system, CNS, are called sensory neurons. And the ones that run from the CNS to effector organs are called motor neurons. Now, we'll talk about that a bit more when we start looking at reflex arcs and nerve responses. That's coming up in a, well, again, a future video. So we won't worry about it now. But there's also a third class called relay neurons. Now, you'll only find them actually in the central nervous system, either in the brain or in the spinal cord. What they do is pass the nerve impulses from the sensory neuron to the motor neuron. Now, notice, all the time I was talking about that, I never said the word messages. Reason? There's actually no information content held in these things. All they are is electrical impulses. So, like, let's have a look at the structure. Right, we'll get that diagram back up again. So can you see the star-shaped end? That bit is actually in the spinal cord. And each of those pointy bits is topped off with some dendrites, as they call them. Now, those are the things that make connections with the neurons. So basically, what you're looking at there is the relay neurons. Yeah? Now, obviously, you can see the nucleus. And we all know what that does, especially if you watch the last video. Now, you see those things that look like bumps down the thing. Now, what they are is, well, they're made of a substance called myelin, which acts as like an insulator in the same way that the plastic covering does on the wiring in your house. Now, neurons can be up to about 1 metre long. They're also thinner than a single human hair. So even if you manage to tease one of them out, you'd struggle to see it with Mark 1 eyeball. Right, let's move on then. We'll have a look this time at a muscle cell. Specifically, these are skeletal muscle cells. Now, what you can't see from this picture is that they're actually stripy. Now, as you can see, they don't look like normal animal cells. I mean, they've got a much more of a defined shape. And what they do is, when they get a signal from the motor neuron, they contract. So they get smaller and fatter. So that means if you've got one of them shortening, that means the ones next to it, the ones all around it shorten, the whole tissue shortens, which means the muscle contracts and shortens and pulls whatever it's attached to. So bone, for instance. How do these things actually work? A muscle cell cytoplasm isn't like the cytoplasm of any other cell in your body. For one thing, it's packed with fibres called myofibrils. And they're the things that actually make the contraction happen. Take a look at this. Now, when the signal comes down, the myosin fibres, so that's the blue ones, which run down the middle of each fibre, form links with the actin fibres that surround them, like almost like a, you know, like in a piston or in a syringe. You've got the plunger, that is like the myosin. The actin is like the tube that you're pushing it into. And as you can see from the bottom diagram, they link the myosin forms links with the actin, and those links contract, and that pulls the actin over the myosin, making it shorter. And that happens in every single myosin fibre in every single cell in that muscle. I mean, obviously that needs a lot of energy, and because of that, your muscle cells tend to have a lot of mitochondria in there. Moving on, these things, red blood cells, also known, to give them the proper name, as erythrocytes. Function: carry oxygen from the lungs to wherever it's needed in the body. They do not carry carbon dioxide back. The only substance they carry as a normal function is oxygen. A cell's go, very simple. Now, one thing you'll notice immediately if you look at them is that the shape is characteristic. It's a biconcave disc. So it's like, think like a ring donut, but with the hole in the middle filled in. Now, that shape gives it the maximum possible surface area over which to absorb oxygen. Now, the stuff that does the absorption is a metalloprotein called hemoglobin. Metalloproteins, basically, they are, well, in this case, hemoglobin, it's a globin, which is a class of protein, attached to an iron atom. And that's where the heme bit comes from, like hematite. Yeah, iron ore, yeah? All right. Now, take a look at this diagram. Something else that's always worth mentioning is that there's no nucleus. The reason for this is pretty obvious. A nucleus would take up space that can actually be used for carrying oxygen. Downside is, that means these cells only live for about 3 months. As an aside, hemoglobin is actually much better at bonding to carbon monoxide than it is to oxygen, which is why carbon monoxide is absolutely deadly. Because, I mean, for one thing, the bond with the oxygen is unstable. which allows the molecule to pick up the oxygen and then drop it off when the concentration gradient changes. So where it gets to somewhere where there's not as much oxygen. Whereas the bond to carbon monoxide is irreversible, so permanent. And that, when you think about it, if you've got that many molecules of carbon monoxide rattling around in your bloodstream, they get picked up by the red blood cells. The red blood cells are then completely out of action. So basically what's happening is you are being suffocated from the inside because your blood cannot carry enough oxygen to keep your other cells going. Bit nasty, that, isn't it? Right, white blood cells. Any GCSE students, you don't need to listen to this bit really because they're not on the course, but BTEC and let's see, and you Americans, keep watching, keep listening, because this bit does actually apply to you. White blood cells are a bit more complex. For one thing, there's more than one type, and each one has got a different function. Taking them in turn then, neutrophils. These have a multi-lobe nucleus. So as you can see there, it's like lumps, and then a thin bit, and then another lump. Their job is to attack and destroy any bacteria or fungi that get into your bloodstream. Next up, you've got your eosinophils. Now these, if you look, have got a nucleus made up of 2 lobes. What they do, similar kind of thing to the last lot, but they attack parasites that get into your blood, and these things are part of your allergic response. Yeah, so for example, if pollen somehow gets into your bloodstream, these things will attack it. Next up, you've got the basophils. Again, these have got 3 lobes, or maybe 2, it kind of depends, and they are also part of the allergic response because these things make histamine. So when you get all filled up with snot or bits of your body swell up when you get an infection, that's down to these guys. And if you take things like, well, cetirizine hydroxide, so, you know, Piriton, all that sort of stuff, what you're doing is you're damping down the effect of these particular cells. Right, next up, lymphocytes. The other type of white blood cell, and there's 2 types of these, as shown in the diagram. Your B cells sit in the lymph nodes and make antibodies. That's it. They are antibody production factories. Each one is slightly different because each one makes a specific antibody, but we'll get onto that in a bit more detail when we get onto the immune system. T cells, they kind of wander around in the bloodstream and attack tumours and virus-infected cells. So anything that it recognises as not being part of itself or not being part of you, it attacks. And what these also are responsible for is switching the immune system off at the end of the infection. So it clears out the infection, and then these things, if they can't detect anything else that shouldn't be there, they will cause the immune system to literally switch off, or the response to switch off anyway. And lastly, you've got monocytes. Now these babies turn into macrophages. They get into your tissues and attack anything that's not supposed to be there. And as you can see, they've got what is described as a kidney-shaped nucleus. So these things, well, these things kind of give a bit of evidence for the idea that the immune system started when something like an amoeba partnered up and got inside a much bigger multicellular organism. Because you think about it, right? These things move in a very similar way to amoebas. And if one of these things lived inside a bigger organism, it gets fed, it's kept nice and warm, it's got plenty of water, and it will attack anything that's not part of the host organism. Right, let's move on to the last 2. The last 2 are the gametes, also known as sex cells. Again, we'll take them in turn, starting up with the ovum, also known as the egg cell. Now, these things are pretty big. They are just about the only single human cell that can be seen with the naked eye. Yes, they are that big. Now, they're made in the ovaries and contain half a set of genes. They also contain something called ooplasm, which is, well, basically it's the yolk. Sperm cells, there's a little more to these, as you can see from the diagram. They are much smaller than the egg cells, but carry a similar amount of DNA. Now, if you look at the parts, the tail is there so it can swim. The midpiece generates energy using mitochondria that it's absolutely crammed with. And the acrosome contains enzymes that can dissolve their way through the egg cell's outer layers, but only for that first cell to arrive, because as soon as that first cell has made its way through the outer layers, the construction of the outer layers of the egg cell change. It hardens, so nothing else gets in. Right, let's call it there then for this one. As a review, number 1, animal cells are all different. Number 2, animal cells are adapted to their function. And number 3 that you've learnt in this video, we've got an explanation of how and why cells are adapted. Next video, we're going to have a look at plant cells. And what we're going to look at specifically are root hair cells, xylem and phloem, and guard cells. See you next time.